Right, so this is episode 6. No, not 6. I did that a long time ago. Episode 36 of Silent Superheroes. And I'm just going to give you a preview of the process I use to edit the podcast. Should anybody care about it. And excuse me, I'm just getting the chat window here somewhere where I can see it. Expecting, of course, an influx of viewers to this live stream. I'm kidding, of course. So the podcast I'm working on is called Silent Superheroes. It's about mental health, kind of at work, and just sort of day to day. And what I try to do is to tell stories about the people who I talk with. And so in this particular case, the recording I'm working on that you can see here, I think, is about an hour and 5 minutes long. You can see that over here on the right hand side. And so my goal is to get this down to somewhere between 40 and 45 minutes. That's what I'm trying to accomplish here. And the reason I do that is because I want to make it a listenable length for somebody who is tuning in. You know, like an hour, 5 minutes, is a long time, right? And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start going through the file, and I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to figure out just who says what at which time, just so I've got sort of a set of markers. And then I'm also just going to, on this first pass, be thinking about, like, is that going to add value to the story? Does that, like, explain something that's important or interesting, or have we gone off on kind of a side tangent, talking about sports or something like that? And that's the kind of stuff I would typically cut out on this first pass here. I've also, by the way, got my lunch sat in front of me as well, so I'll be eating that as we go through. But let's get cracking. So what I'm going to do is zoom in a little bit here. I can zoom in and out very easily. So now I can kind of see it's me, James, at the top here, Ben, the guest, Ben Johns, at the bottom, and hopefully you'll hear this when I start to listen. But I listen typically or watch these podcasts at something like about 1.5 times, just again because it's time consuming. The only downside of that is sometimes it's easy to miss something, and it's easy for me to label as I go along. So I know this start bit here, I added a label there at the bottom, and my convention is to do the initials of the person talking, and then just what they're talking about. So this is going to be me saying welcome to the show. So just listen through to that.
Welcome to Silent Superheroes. I'm here with today's guest, Ben. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
So Ben, why don't you start by telling us briefly, who are you and what do you do?
My name's Ben Johns. I live in Seattle and I work at Treehouse. I'm going to give foster kids a childhood in the future. It's a nonprofit, and I work in fundraising with major gifts.
And I met you through a presentation I gave at...
Okay, so, like, I listened to the bit there. I know, like, this is Ben Johns, and he's from Treehouse. That's kind of the main thing that he's going to be doing today. So we can kind of skip on from there. Now, if I played back, I guess, at like 1 times normal speed, I could probably get the editing done in real time. Get all these tags on the file in real time. Because I do it 1.5 times, I have to keep stopping and starting here. So here we go. Oh, thank you. Someone there is saying that there's a lot of white noise. So is that like a EM hum or like radio hum, or is it like more like static or something like that? Whoever you are, if you're listening, it would be good to know. It took a while to get this all set up this morning, and That's interesting. I was getting a bit of static, and then I changed the configuration, and then I stopped getting static. And I guess now we're getting it again. And again, thank you, whoever you are, appreciate it. Is the static on the podcast, so like this? And I met you through a presentation I gave. So on that bit, or on the talk about the same game as your voice. Whoever you are knows your stuff, which is super. Thank you. Okay, so there's no voice on the static. No static on the voice. There's static on the playback. So again, this is what I'm playing back the podcast. And I met you through a presentation I gave at Treehouse, and okay, yeah, if it's ambient. My house is insane for either RF or EM hum. That's usually not too loud, but tried multiple microphones, like multiple locations in the house. Looked at ground loop hum, and actually in the end I took a Zoom recorder and walked around with a microphone. And there are certain places it's inside and it's outside the house, places it's stronger, places it's weaker, like it's angled on one axis but not the other axis so much. So that's a problem I've not been able to fix yet, and it's actually a great question for the podcast because I often record in this house, and obviously I edit it out in post-production, just do some noise reduction. So I'm going to leave it there for now and just kind of get on with the edit process that we've got going on here. So let me see. This is a long question about me. I think asking about, or kind of explaining where it was that me and Ben met.
And I met you through a presentation I gave at Treehouse, and just before I gave my presentation, there was an amazing video of the impact Treehouse had on the kids that it worked with. And I just remember what an amazing range there was of gratitude and experience from somebody I think who was I'm going to go be a doctor. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I'm going to be a doctor. Through to, I remember, I think it was a young woman who said, I just want a normal job and a normal life. And that kind of range of impact was amazing.
I remember when I did that presentation and they had the video of all these kids who'd worked with Treehouse. I remember the girl who said, they were asked her, what's your ambition? And her ambition was, what I really look forward to the most is having a normal house and a normal life. And she went on, I think, to maybe talk about house and maybe kids and stuff like that. And it just brought home, I guess, how privileged I am, because for her grandest expectation was this normal life. So it was a very moving presentation. So I'm just going to annotate this here. Interestingly, my keyboard is under my microphone, and I'm somewhat struggling to get to it. But anyway, here we are. So yeah, about the Treehouse presentation. So when I was about to look at this, I was like, oh, should I edit this out? Because talking about how we met and stuff like that, it doesn't seem that interesting. But hopefully it does establish a little bit kind of the work that Ben does. So let's go on.
I really appreciate that one of the things Treehouse does is stick to evidence, and part of that is asking youth what they need and responding accordingly. So we're formalizing some assessment models to really, as they make this transition to adulthood and independence, not just being a kid, but getting their needs met. And if it's keeping a roof over head, then that's the priority. If it's pursuing school or a livable wage, it all fits together. But if you don't ask what youth need, then how are you going to help them?
I think we'll come more to how you find yourself working in that particular sector in due course.
Yeah, so Ben talking about the place he worked, working with young people, giving an assessment. Some different people have different needs. That feels to me like something I should keep for now. I'll end up doing a couple of passes on this. Now this next section is one where I go into it and I talk about kind of context for, we're going to talk about this thing later. I feel like, do I really need to point that out? That second's wasted, so let's listen and see if that's good.
I think we'll come more to how you find yourself working in that particular sector in due course, but let's talk mental health and mental illness for a second. So there is a reason we're having this conversation and the conditions that you're managing. So why don't you just...
So here's the problem I create for myself here. You listen that I do that setup and then I just run straight into, so there's a reason that we're here. And the problem with that is it's going to be hard for me to try and cut anything out because it all runs together. So if I'd been paying attention when I was recording, I would have consciously left a gap in here before I asked the question to make it easy to edit.
I think we'll come more to how you find yourself working in that particular sector in due course, but let's talk mental health and mental illness for a second. So there's an
easy edit here, it turns out. So I zoomed in a little bit more so you can see the gaps here between what people are saying. And I think if I start from here, let's talk mental health and mental illness for a second. Okay, so apart from the which we can probably just trim out here. Let's talk mental health and mental... Alright, cool. So then if I come back out here, and I just delete this section here. Well, actually, I'm not going to delete it. First, I'm going to listen to what it sounds like if I deleted it. So that's like
use me, then how are you going to help them?
Let's talk mental health. So that's okay. It's not perfect like connection between the two, but I think it will work. So now I can just go ahead and delete that. And if you look down here at the bottom left of the screen, you can see there's a few different indicators here. You've got audio position, you've got start position, and you've got the length of the selection. So here, the selection is 8 minutes, 8 seconds. So that seems like a small amount, but like we're a minute in, I'm going to trim about 8 seconds off. Like if I do 8 seconds every minute for the whole of the recording, that's a bunch of time that goes. And so this becomes kind of a gamified thing for me, and kind of going through this process. And since there's nobody on the live stream right now, I'm just going to take a pause, and I'm going to eat my lunch. So that will forever be recorded on this stream. Well, let's do the delete first. Ready? Alright, there we go. What I got here is a chicken and dumpling stew that my wife cooked last night. It's delicious. Alright, somebody's in. I'm going to put my lunch to the side for a second and continue with this edit process. So I'm just going through right now, I'm figuring out nothing, because that person dropped out, whoever they were. So that on the right side gives me a chance to continue to finish my lunch. If obviously I planned things better, then I wouldn't be eating my lunch and doing a stream at the same time. All right, so we're going to go on here. So let's see what this next little section is.
Let's talk mental health and mental illness for a second. So there is a reason we're having this conversation and a condition that you're managing. So why don't you just share what that condition is and maybe kind of what you understand it to be at a high level?
All right, so I always ask people what their condition is, or often what we're talking about. Okay, so your condition. And that just sets up kind of, I guess, where they've ended up. And then typically we'll go back in time and talk about, okay, well, how did you get to that point? But it helps people understand quickly, like, oh, this person's bipolar or has borderline personality disorder or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I have a bipolar diagnosis. I've known that since the year my wife and I got married, which was 6 years ago. Struggled for years beforehand in various ways. But, my understanding of it is I'm the type of person who needs to take medication for the rest of my life. I think it's important.
All right, so just see the little notes I'm taking here as I go. So, like, bipolar for 6 years, that might be useful.
Years ago. Struggled for years beforehand in various ways. But, my understanding of it is I'm.
So then I asked him, the second question is, like, what do you understand about that condition? And so I am going to sort of note about that. And note, for me, what stuck out was he said, kind of, we'll need drugs. Which I think is a way of saying, like, it's a serious condition. It's a lifelong condition, which bipolar is. All right. I have no idea how loud the chewing is on the stream.
My understanding of it is I'm the type of person who needs to take medication for the rest of my life. I think it's important that folks who are bipolar not be confused on that particular topic. One of the meds I take is to keep the ceiling a little lower.
Right, so really interesting, actually, in retrospect, that his focus was on the drugs that he needs to take. A lot of people are very fearful of drugs, but he hasn't talked about, like, the up and down moods or anything like that, which you may expect someone to talk about with bipolar. And I think he's going to go in here and talk about the drugs that he takes. So let's see if that's what happens.
One of the meds I take is to keep the ceiling a little lower, meaning I don't want to become manic. So I don't want the top to blow off on the high end of frequency. And then I want to keep the floor from falling out in terms of preventing depression.
So how your ceiling and
Okay, so he talks about ceiling and floor, talks about the drug that drops the ceiling, but not what drops the, or improves the floor. I think if I was back recording this again, I can't, would wish that I'd asked him about, what drug helps you with the floor, and maybe he'll come on to say that. We'll see. Hang on.
so how your ceiling and floor different than an average person?
Well, depression for someone who's bipolar can be incredibly profound. So if any listener has ever been depressed, maybe imagine the depth of it longer and the ability to dig out of it more tedious. The mania stuff, I think we've all been hyped up and kind of made quick decisions and made rash decisions, but those can be pretty heavily consequential financially and health-wise.
It's like we've all been out at the bar at night and like, all right, just one more drink. It's like, bipolar mania is like, just one more drink.
And sometimes because I'm trying to write a tag and listen to what's happening, I end up writing a tag that makes no sense here, which is big decisions. I got no idea why I wrote that. But what he's basically talking about is just kind of, I think he's comparing, ups and downs to, like, regular person experiences. And that's mainly what I take away from that. And then I'm going to ask a question.
It's like we've all been out at the bar at night and like, all right, just one more drink. It's like, bipolar mania is like, just one more drink, but for, every hour, weeks and weeks at a time.
Right, and every person I meet, I'm going to buy a drink too and just completely drain.
Okay, so like in bipolar, if you're not familiar with it, you have these two mood states. There's kind of very elevated state and this very kind of down state. And in that elevated state, you'll kind of tend to be like life of the party, crazy fun, but like just going on and on and on. So that's kind of what he's talking about here. Or I guess that's what I'm talking about there. That's what I'm doing. Well, that's interesting. First time doing a live stream for Silent Superheroes here. and the concurrent viewers has dropped to 0, which is remarkable because it's been showing one concurrent viewer this whole time. So I guess somebody was watching this whole time, which is neat.
Right, and every person I meet, I'm going to buy a drink too, and just completely drain my pocketbook.
We laugh. There's definitely humor in it, but it can also be very devastating, to lives. And each of us has a journey that we take to get.
Let's give that a pause. Let's move the mic out of my way of my keyboard a little bit. And if you're in the chat, you could definitely tell me how well the microphone is now picking up, because somebody asked a question I didn't answer. Sorry, I missed having the chat up for a second there. Let's try the chat over here. No, because then everyone can see the chat anyway. Forgive me while I sit here talking to myself incoherently. Anyway, to answer the question, sorry to interrupt my lunch, did I record the other person locally or were they recorded elsewhere? I pulled it into Audacity. Yes, they were recorded remotely because I did the recording during COVID, and obviously that I couldn't get together with him even though he's local, so we had to record in Audacity, which is why you hear sound quality that sounds a little kind of off, and it's because I think one of the reasons is Audacity records at a lower frequency rate than a CD or your typical kind of recording. I think it records at 32 kilohertz instead of 44. So that's why it sounds a little janky. But yeah, then you get an MP3 type file and you pull it into Audacity, and then it converts it into something that you can edit. There's actually a step I go through between recording and editing. I send the file away to somebody who does a deep clean, which is just going through and editing out many of the pauses and the ums and the ers and times when people obviously mess something up, and that just saves me a bunch of time. For me it's worth paying for that because that's just very laborious work. So coming back in here, we are going to we're going to go into this next bit and see what I talked about, the bar analogy from
right, and every person I meet, I'm going to buy a drink too, and just completely drain my pocketbook.
So that's a really common thing for people with bipolar or financial problems, because you kind of can't almost see the consequences of your actions, and so you might go out to the bar and say I'll buy drinks for everybody, and do that for 3 nights running, even though financially any normal person would say that is not a smart thing, to do. So give myself a note there, and again these notes are just so when I come back to do another edit, I just kind of can remember what each piece was about.
We laugh. There's definitely humor in it, but it can also be very devastating, to lives. And each of us has a journey that we take to get to a diagnosis. So why don't you talk about the journey that you took? How did you find out you were bipolar?
So here's an interesting one. There's 2 parts of this. Then there's me talking about how devastating it can be to have this reckless financial behavior, and then I go in and ask about more about his condition. And just my first instinct is that my little bit of preamble is unnecessary, and also I tend to edit myself out of these recordings a lot because I want it to be focused on the person who's there. So let's have a listen again.
Right, and every person I meet, I'm going to buy a drink too, and just completely drain my pocketbook.
We laugh. There's definitely humor in it, but it can also be very devastating, to lives. And each of us has a journey that we take to get to a diagnosis. So why don't you talk about the journey that you took? How did you find?
So that's interesting. So I'm going to go through a few different possible scenarios here. I can leave everything as is. I was talking before about maybe wanting to trim down this part. I think this would be the logic place to trim to. And each of us has all right, so let's listen to what this would be. And each of us has it's kind of okay, right? Because it flows. He's kind of laughing about how bad that can be, and then I say, and each of us has a journey, let's go talk about your journey. So I think I prefer that to unedited. What I'm going to do now is mark that segment. So that's now marked. I know what that was, so I can select that again. And then I think I heard something else I can do in here. And each of us has a journey that we take to get to a diagnosis. So why don't you talk about the journey that you took? So there's this little gap here, and then I say, so there's this journey that we all take. So what we're going to do is we're going to try doing a more comprehensive edit. And we'll see how this works. So why don't you talk about... It's actually a little tricky to hear that one because you've only got the laugh. It's hard to kind of get a feel for how it will sound. So what I'm going to do is just delete all that.
And I meet, I remember I drank 2 and just completely drained my pocketbook.
So why don't you talk about the journey that you took? How did you find out you were bipolar?
First of all, I had to get sober.
Oh, see, this is the fun thing that you get when you do this. I can't decide right now the right way to go with this one because that sounds a little, it kind of sounds a little callous. Like he's like, oh, I drained my pocketbook, and then I just sort of completely deadpan here. So why don't you talk about so why don't you talk about your condition?
And every person I meet, I remember I drank 2 and just completely drained my pocketbook.
So why don't you talk about the journey that you took? How did you find out you were bipolar?
First of all, I had to get sober.
All right, so this is only the first edit. So if I can't make a decision on my first edit here, then what I'll do is not make any edit, but I'm going to note these 2 as possible cuts. And then I can come back later with a fresher ear and I can see, decide then what I want to do. Alright, so we got that figured out. We know we're going to keep that a little bit. So then I've asked him to talk about his bipolar. So I'm just put that here. And for me doing these recordings or these podcasts, like how people get to discover that they're bipolar or whatever it might be is the most fascinating part of this whole thing, because I think for me, if you've got some kind of mental illness, it takes a while to realize that the way you think and behave is not normal. Like it's not the way that the kind of average person thinks and behaves. So you go through this huge period of time where you just don't sort of know or get that you're having a different experience than other people. So maybe it's a little bigger here. Maybe I'll zoom better. Actually, I've never tried editing like this, so maybe I'll prefer to do it this way. There we go, more full screen. Alright, so I'm asking him to talk about his journey, so let's find out what Ben has to say. My little marker down here. Alright.
First of all, I had to get sober in order to really start to understand what was going on with me in terms of mental health, aside from addiction to marijuana and alcohol. Anybody who knows their self in terms of psychology, a psychologist will tell you, I can't really give you a diagnosis until you're sober. It's certainly not in your first 30 days of sobriety. So I struggled there for several years. I use the analogy, I was kind of like a meteor on fire, just crashing into Earth. And that's what my journey to sobriety was like. There were a few near-death incidents and some heavy-duty depression years prior for basically all through my 20s. I'm in my 40s now.
All right, so let's have a look at what's going on with this bit here. So there's kind of a lot covered. He talked about getting sober. You can't be diagnosed until sober. And then he calls himself a meteor on fire crashing. I might try and find that bit and just put another note in there. So what, he's going to talk for maybe like 40 seconds or so. I just like to have regular notes in here.
Heavy duty depression.
All right, so it was before.
That's what my journey to sobriety was like. There were a few near-death incidents and some heavy duty depression years prior for basically all through my 20s.
So I'm going to put my next note in here, and as I'm listening to this section, I feel like there's maybe some repetition and something I could delete.
First of all, I had to get sober in order to really start to understand what was going on with me in terms of mental health, aside from addiction to marijuana and alcohol. Anybody who knows their self in terms of psychology, A psychologist will tell you, I can't really give you a diagnosis until you're sober.
All right, I think that's something we can do here. So notice how kind of flubs.
Anybody who knows their salt in terms of psychology, a psychologist will tell you.
So there's like that whole bit where it's like, anybody knows so like that, and we all speak like that, especially when we're trying to think about what it is we want to say. So like, it doesn't serve any purpose, takes up a little time, and there's a nice little moment here we can cut into. Think
Psychology.
Oh, that's one more on. So it's here.
A psychologist will tell.
Okay, so it says a psychologist will tell you, and then
Addiction to marijuana and alcohol.
okay, cool. So if we now listen to what this is like without this, so this is the section.
Anybody who knows their salt in terms of psychology.
So even at the ending here, like just I can't quite get what I want to say. So we can help that out here by just editing this out, which would which would sound like this.
Addiction to marijuana and alcohol. A psychologist will tell.
Now, the only problem with that edit is he's speaking much more loudly when talking about a psychologist. Like a psychologist will tell you, versus the run-up to him saying that. And so I think I'll leave that. What I've sometimes done is to do increase the volume slightly on what he's saying, but we're not like shooting for, we're recording for NPR or something like that. So let's listen what this sounds like.
Addiction to marijuana and alcohol. A psychologist will tell.
That's not perfect, but I think this will do, and we can fix that later if we want to. All right, so let's continue on, and I think I want to cut in when he's talking about like being 44.
A psychologist will tell you, I can't really give you a diagnosis until you're sober. It's certainly not in your first 30 days of sobriety. So I struggled there for several years. I use the analogy, I was kind of like a meteor on fire, just crashing into Earth. And that's what my journey to sobriety was like. There were a few near-death incidents and some heavy, heavy-duty depression years prior for basically all through my 20s.
All right, so like this stuff, like again, I'm questioning what was useful here.
And that's what my journey to sobriety was like. There were a few near-death incidents and some heavy, heavy-duty depression years prior for basically all through my 20s. I'm in my 40s now. I was severely depressed and didn't really know how to address it. The journey is...
All right, so I think what I'm going to do is we're going to hit...
And that's...
Sorry, we're going to hit where he says...
Some heavy, heavy-duty depression years prior.
So I don't think the time bit is important because he's already established that there's a certain point in time that he was depressed. Maybe he talks about when he stopped being depressed later. So we need to find a point where we can cut back in.
The journey is...
Okay, so maybe that's it. So I'll mark that. Let's come back through.
I'm in my 40s now. I was severely depressed and didn't really know how to address it. The journey is one of thinking I was just a major depressive for many, many years. Thinking that...
There's a couple of things I could do here. I think I can get away
I was severely
with cutting in here, but he might duplicate talking about depression, which might sound weird. So let's give that a shot.
heavy, heavy-duty depression. I was severely
Could put the edit in the right place. That would have worked.
heavy, heavy-duty depression. I was severely
I actually think that works quite well. So that one definitely works, and I'm just going to run with that. I have the instinct to cut out this little bit on the right-hand side.
I was severely severely depressed and didn't really know how to address it. The journey is one of thinking.
Yeah, that's the right edit. So we'll leave the bit about being severely depressed and didn't know how to address it. That's an important point. Like, I was depressed and I just had no idea what to do about it. So let's try
Heavy,
one more time.
heavy-duty depression. I was severely
There we go, cool. And then just because I'm tidy, I'm going to delete all these labels here. Otherwise I'll end up coming back and having to delete hundreds of labels later.
And some heavy, heavy-duty depression. I was severely depressed and didn't really know how to address it. The journey is one of thinking I was just a major depressive for many.
Alright, so now we'll cut in here. So this journey was thinking I was says next.
The journey is one of thinking I was just a major depressive for many, many years, thinking that I could find a solution and change my life in such a way that I could stop falling into these horrible depressions. Yeah, like I said, just like a bat out of hell, I started drinking and smoking marijuana where previously it wasn't so obvious that I had a problem.
Were you being
So I'm
Stop
thinking here,
falling into these horrible depressions. Yeah, like I said, just like a bat out of hell, I started drinking.
I'm going to say, take the yeah, like I said out.
Falling into these horrible depressions. Like a bat out of
So I think what he's trying to say is that he drank like a bat out of hell to manage his depression. And what I'm doing here is I've decided, if you heard that the first time, there was a big gap between the two things that he said because I gave too much space. So now I'm going to have taken some of that space out and it should sound more natural.
falling into these horrible depressions. Like a bat out of
Right, and like a bat.
Like a bat out of hell, I started drinking and smoking marijuana where previously it wasn't so obvious that I had a problem.
were you being treated for the depression?
Yeah,
Right, so we're being treated. That's cool. And then what does Ben have to say? Let's see.
yeah. I tried numerous medications over the years. I, like a lot of people, would try something, not feel too good about it, stop taking it, be fine for a while, get worse again, try another med. I did end up trying Wellbutrin, and it was working fairly well for a while. But you can't really take antidepressants if you're bipolar. It can be kind of dangerous.
You know, I just sat here thinking, I know that, but I don't know why. If you know what I mean? It's like, does it just make
All right, this might be me. The problem with being naturally curious is that you end up asking questions out of curiosity, not asking questions that like are useful. And sometimes my guests will save me by giving an answer that sort of goes off into something else useful. The question is, or the question he's posed, if you're unipolar depression, like regular depression, you take these things often called SSRIs, or often they are SSRIs, and they just kind of boost the amount of happy chemicals that are in your brain, or actually stop it getting reabsorbed. And the problem with being bipolar is if your brain gets more happy, then you're likely to go into a kind of manic state. And so there's often a problem with people who are bipolar, who are showing up as depressed, being given these unipolar medications that make them, I say this with kind of love and kindness, but kind of go crazy. So I'm going to ask him about that. Unipolar meds. Or let's say depression meds. Bad for bipolar. So I've got my let's find out what he thinks the answer is.
I have no idea why antidepressants are a problem for bipolar folks. All I know is it's just not the right med. And I'm glad that there's some improvements in terms of possible meds that folks can take these days. I'm able to succeed on Lamictal to maintain staying out of hypomania and depression together with Seroquel. And those meds, Lamictal has a lot less side effects than some other older meds, which are known to be effective. So I'm super grateful for that.
I take both Lamictal and lithium. The lithium does have side effects. I have to do blood tests from time to time to make sure I'm not.
All right, so as I just said, I also take Lamictal. So I'm thinking about this one. I asked him about why bipolar meds are bad for depression. No, other way around. Why depression meds are bad for bipolar. And my instinct was like, oh, I'm going to be able to cut this out. But then he goes and talks about the meds that he takes, which is obviously leading us into another discussion. So I'm kind of thinking about, okay, well, maybe I end up carving out a whole bunch of stuff about medication, or maybe I keep it in because we're talking about meds. So I'm going to keep it in for now, and we can figure that out later. So let's see what we've got going on here. I'm going to talk a few side effects, and then I'm going to ask what is, I'm sure, an extremely wise question.
I take both Lamictal and lithium. The lithium does have side effects. I have to do blood tests from time to time to make sure I'm not lithium toxic, and I feel like kidneys are failing and thyroid's going crazy and stuff like that. You have a visitor behind you. Do you want to quickly check in, see what's needed? Tried lots of different medications for depression. Sounds like you found.
So I have a guy who edits all the kind of flubs and stuff like that out, but he evidently didn't do a great job there, because if you listen to it again, like while I'm recording, I think in this case Ben's wife came in and said, "Hey, your wife's stuck her head around the door. Do you need to like stop and talk to her?" And I forget whether he did or he didn't, but obviously that's kind of stuff that I would always edit out, because who cares?
Lithium toxic, and I feel like kidneys are failing and thyroid's going crazy and stuff like that. You have a visitor behind you. Do you want to quickly check in, see what's needed? Tried lots of different.
So do you want to check in? And then you've tried lots of different meds. So I think I'm going to take that bit out, obviously. But actually, I think I'm going to take out my list of my medication. I talk about it on the podcast from time to time. If you wanted to find out what that is, it's fine. And I only mention the side effects of lithium, which were adequately covered elsewhere. I don't feel like that's too important. So let's just check what this is going to sound like.
Yeah, so I'm super grateful for that.
Tried lots of different. There's one thing I don't like about that, which is what's needed. That's just the way I answer the question. I didn't sort of say you tried something. I just said tried.
Yeah, so I'm super grateful for that.
Tried lots of different. Well, it's going to sound a bit crummy. Anyway, we do it. So let's just take that out. Some more time gone, which is
Tried lots of different medications for depression. Sounds like you found your own medications in marijuana and alcohol. How did they work for somebody with undiagnosed?
Right. So he talks about. I talk about essentially self-medication, right? Using drugs and alcohol. And how did that work? And I would have asked that question because we all know the answer. The answer is it doesn't work. But I think it's kind of important to have a discussion about why it doesn't work. And so that's what I'm trying to get to here, and Ben's specific experience.
I was just completely ignoring all responsibility and waking up and getting high first thing before breakfast. And I think it just allows sort of an alternate reality to be enjoyable. It allowed me to drift and ignore responsibilities, because what was happening in my life was I was ignoring financial realities, ignoring my performance in school. There were times when I was in my master's degree or earlier getting my bachelor's degree where, when I was getting my master's degree, by the way, I was sober, but I still had this tendency to ignore and let things stack up. So any drug or ability to just kind of blot out the stuff that's going on in the back of my head that I haven't tended to well, including relationships.
So my understanding is that it was.
That's a silly thing. I'm going to take out this here. I think this flows better without it.
That I haven't tended to well, including relationships.
So hadn't tended to do well. Gives himself a little pause. Including relationships. So I like that. I'm a bit worried that I'm 7 minutes in and I haven't done much cutting yet. That probably means that I'm just not in a particularly savage mood. Right, let's move on.
So my understanding is that it was through a relationship that you got on the path to diagnosis, or it kind of led you to diagnosis. So how do relationships play into your journey?
All right, how do relationships? So this actually is a good time. Sometimes I feel like I've kind of lost the track of where I am, so I'll just step back out and look at the big picture again. So what did we talk about? We talked about where Ben works and what they do, that he's got bipolar, what bipolar is, how his ceiling is different than other people. I'm actually wondering, could that maybe be edited out? Let's mark it for thinking about later. And I'm thinking that I might edit that out because we only talk about the up, not the down, so it's kind of asymmetric in that respect. And I don't know we particularly talk effectively about what mania or hypomania is, so it's kind of just a little throwaway thing. We talk a little bit about the impact, but not a lot. So I could actually, if I wanted to make a big cut, what I'd do is probably come back to here, where he's talking about his journey. That's where he's talking about his diagnosis, and then maybe this will work. Let's listen.
falling out in terms of preventing depression.
So why don't you talk about... All right, so obviously one problem with doing that kind of, where I mark a bit and then I play up to it and a bit after it, like it's a specific function that ignores the bit that you've selected, is that you only get a couple of seconds either side, so it can be a little difficult sometimes to track where you're at. So let's just give ourselves a little bit here to listen to.
And of frequency. And then I want to keep the floor from falling out in terms of preventing depression.
All right, so we just kind of talked about, like, I want to just manage the up and the down. So then the second bit was, then we'll pick up talking about journey. So why don't you talk about the journey that you took? How did you find out you were bipolar? Yeah, I think am I willing to make this a hard cut already? I mean, the reality is, next time I listen to it through, I'll have forgotten this was ever here. That's probably a good sign. Very rarely do I listen to it back. I'm like, oh, where's that bit about, whatever. And this is 1 minute and 5 seconds of cut, which is pretty cool. It's a good amount of time to cut from 1 hour and 5 minutes. You think about, like, I'm trying to get from 1 hour and 5 minutes down to 45 minutes. There's a 20th of what I need to cut right there. So I've talked myself into it. This is going, just need to make sure, so label, got my mouse pointer on there, talking about the journey, so that's what we need to put in here, talk about journey. Alright, I'm happy with that. It's going to be quick, effective, but what I do need to do is, just one of the, I use Audacity for the editing, and then just one of the little quirks is I often end up with like 13 different tags. You see here on one line, and obviously it's messy and some of them are just unused. But the quirk is that if I delete, let's say I delete edit possible cut here, edit possible cut is still there, and it deleted the one that was at the top. Like if I delete edit possible cut again, the one at the top disappears again. So in this case I happen to have the same thing at the bottom. I can just go ahead and delete all these as I am. And in good shape. Alright, nice. That was a fun little edit. And that's why sometimes it's worth like coming back after you have gone a little bit farther ahead and just thinking, okay, where are we going? What's being said? What is it that I want to say? So let's go back to the kind of farthest along we've been. Self-medication, ignoring responsibility, how do relationships play into that journey? Okay, cool. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. We talked about kind of booze and how that played into his journey and smoking weed. Now we're going to talk about topic of relationships. So let's see what Ben has to say.
It's one thing to hear me talk about what it's like to be manic or hypomanic, but it's another to be in a relationship and watch somebody who you love do it. So a number of my family members had already been hurt by my manic episodes and my addictive. But my wife, for the first time, saw me become hypomanic, and I started a job, we bought a house, and we were getting married all at the same time. So I would say that there were some situational triggers. It's kind of
All right, so I want you to notice something that happens here. And we all do this. I've just now started to notice it more because of editing a podcast. So he's going to have 3 different thoughts, and he's not going to complete the first 2.
By my manic episodes and my addictive. But my wife, for the first time, saw me become hypomanic, and I started a job. We bought a house.
Okay, so my manic episodes, my wife first saw me, and then I got a job. So, I mean, it's fine. Like, again, as I say, we all do it.
Who you love do it. So a number of my family members had already been hurt by my manic episodes and my addictive. But my wife, for the first time, saw me become hypomanic, and I started a job.
All right, so I think we have to go
It's
for
another to be in a relationship and watch somebody who you love do it.
Now, it would be nice if the thought about his family got finished, or maybe I picked it up when I was doing the recording. I did not, so we don't get to kind of find out more about that. But there we go. That's what happens doing these things.
watch somebody who you love do it. But my wife,
Nope, didn't find the right spot. Should have looked before. Yeah,
I started a job,
here we go.
watch somebody who you love do it. I started a job.
Okay, so it's hard to watch somebody you love do it. I'm going to argue that you could go even farther than this.
It's one thing to hear me talk about what it's like to be manic or hypomanic, but it's another to be in a relationship and watch somebody who you love do it. So a number of my family members had already been hurt.
Alright, so let's go back over here and...
I started a job, we bought a house, and we were getting married all at the same time. So I would say that there were some situational triggers. It's kind of bound to happen at some point. We've been dating for a few years. And so...
Okay, so that's interesting. So he is talking, just didn't sound like it to me first up, but he is making a contiguous thought. So now we have to come change this. So this is the bit where it's it's hard to watch somebody in a relationship go through it. So we now need to find the bit where he talks about his wife.
But my wife, for the first time, saw me become hypomanic, and I started a job. We bought a house, and we're...
Alright, so the way we're going to fix this is I'm going to cut this piece here, I think.
watch somebody who you love do it. But my wife,
So you watch somebody you love do it, then my wife, which is fine, and then there's...
but my wife, for the first time, saw me become hypomanic, and I started to...
Okay, so I saw me become hypomanic. We can take the and out, become hypomanic and...
me become hypomanic. I started a job.
I prefer that. I could make an argument both ways.
Me become hypomanic. I started a job. Me become hypomanic. I started a job.
When my wife, for the first time, saw me become hypomanic, I started a job, we bought a house, and we were getting married all at the same time. So I would say that there were some situational triggers.
So I wonder if the thing here is just to remove a little bit more of this pause. 'Cause right now it sounds like saw me hypomanic. I started a job, but like you could put those much closer together and maybe it'll sound more like my wife saw me for the first time hypomanic. I started a job, etc. So let's give that a little shot here.
Me become hypomanic. I started a job.
Yeah.
Me become hypomanic. I started a job.
Let's try the whole thing.
First time saw me become hypomanic, I started a job, we bought a house, and we were getting married all at the same time. So I would say that there were some situational triggers. It's kind of bound to happen at some point. We've been dating for a few years. And so it creeps in, the paranoia, the inability to sleep as much, the pressured speech. Actually, my voice drops. I start to feel like I'm being followed. I have these narratives that are wrapped around a kernel of truth. And then they take on a life of their own, which is totally magnified. And by the way, it's like a amplified version of my own neuroses, which everybody has, right? But then its expression is just, it has a lot of octane.
So I hear that you perhaps in a situation.
All right, so he talks about the various different symptoms that he has. I want to find those and mark them.
So it creeps in, the paranoia, the inability to sleep as much, the pressured speech. Actually, my voice drops. I start to feel like I'm being followed. I have these narratives that are wrapped around a kernel of truth. And then they take on a life of their own, which is totally magnified. And by the way, it's like a amplified version of my own neuroses, which everybody has, right? But then its expression is just, it has a lot of octane.
I love that he said about his pressured speech being sort of lower than his normal voice. I missed that or didn't hear it the first time or when we recorded this. And I hadn't heard anyone say that before, so that's kind of cool. So let's pick up. I'm going to ask the question. Let's see what it is.
So I hear that you perhaps in a situation of stress and pressure, maybe if you start having to run hard at something, that flips you into or can flip you into a mode where your perception of reality of things that are going on about you gets a little skewed. Did I hear that broadly right? Anyway.
Right, so I ask him about, I kind of summarize his triggers, right? I summarize what he's told me. And I'm trying to think why I would have done that. I think it's a way probably I was trying to get deeper into the topic and get him to talk a little bit more about the triggers and his experience of the illness. So let's keep going.
Anywhere from a little to a hell of a lot. Yeah, in terms of perception of reality getting skewed. And by the way, time of year, increased sunlight, anything that would normally cause a person to sleep less can be something for me to keep an eye on. My distorted reality is actually fairly interesting to me as well, so I would add that there's a pull to sort of a confused interpretation of what's going on that can be very much centered around me. Right? And I think all of us have some degree of feeling like we're the center of the universe. All of our thoughts are going through our unconsciousness. But then when the consciousness is distorting it can be very compelling. So at first it's quite entertaining, and then it starts to get a little creepy, and then it starts to wedge between my relationships and make me feel more isolated.
So obviously, what is on Ben's mind a lot about this is the impact on others, and particularly the paranoia and the delusion side of the condition for him. And we'll hear more about that, later in the recording, because he's definitely had experiences around that. From an editing point of view, what I'm thinking about right now is is there something to trim here? Because he kind of says the same thing, or says kind of variations of it a few times in a row. Take better notes where it was, but hang on.
And by the way, time of year, increased sunlight, anything that would normally cause a person to sleep less can be something for me to keep an eye on. My distorted reality is actually fairly interesting to me as well, so I would add that there's a pull to...
Alright, so he starts talking about distorted reality. I think this is where the trim is going to happen. Let's see.
Sort of a confused interpretation of what's going on that can be very much centered around me. Right? And I think all of us have some degree of feeling like we're the center of the universe. All of our thoughts are going through our unconsciousness. But then when the consciousness is distorting it can be very compelling. So at first it's quite entertaining, and then it starts to get a little creepy, and then it starts to wedge between my relationships and make me feel more isolated. And eventually it gets to a point where I'm just straight up acting weird. And other people are kind of trying to intervene.
I'm not going to cut any of this, but I'm going to note it for later as possible edits. So there we go. Alright, let's move on.
What are examples, or what is an example of a kind of beast that you have become on one of these journeys?
Well, when it's bad, I mean, I consider myself like a big animal, like a grizzly. Otherwise, it's more like the mountain lion type.
What's a grizzly delusion for you?
I think the delusion of being followed.
So I think what I picked up here is he talks about, like you said that you can be a beast. What kind of beast are you? And he makes some analogies, but isn't really answering the question. Just kind of, oh well, I could be this or I could be that. And so that's why I asked the follow-up question here, which is, what kind of bear? Just try and make it specific. Let's see if we can get an answer.
What's a grizzly delusion for you?
I think the delusion of being followed can express itself in so many ways. So initially it might look like something like, oh, I'm in a cafe wondering if someone's watching me. I'm online wondering if someone's tracking my behavior. And then, it's always sort of hinged around my beliefs about the importance of peace and the war machine, so I'd get sort of self-righteous. And then it would turn into somebody's analyzing every nuance of my behavior, as if I'm saying something, as if I'm some sort of spy. Someone's actually...
Slightly...
And then it would turn into somebody's analyzing every nuance of my behavior, as if I'm saying something, as if I'm some sort of spy. Someone's actually interpreting word for word what I'm saying and trying to skew it into some sort of message that's not what I'm actually saying. So then I start tripping over my words. When it's really bad, not even being able to write things down on a pad of paper and needing to start drawing, that would be like a couple days from either hospitalization or severely medicating myself. Like literally being uncomfortable talking to people, being uncomfortable.
All right, cool. So I'm going to put a note here.
That would be like a couple days.
It talks about not being able to...
when it's really bad, not even being able to write things down on a pad of paper and needing to start drawing, that would be like a couple days from either hospitalization or severely medicating myself. Like literally being uncomfortable talking to people, being uncomfortable writing things down, because my consciousness has just completely sabotaged itself.
What's interesting about paranoid delusion, at least as I understand it, is...
So I think for somebody who hasn't experienced a paranoid delusion, I think what's most interesting about that is how much Ben knows when it's going to get too bad. And you say, like, if I start not being able to write or draw things, and I'm worried about people following me, then I'm a couple of days from hospitalization. Which is pretty amazing self-awareness. That's like saying, I've got a infection in my finger, and I know it's going to be septic in 3 days, right? It's just not the kind of thing that most people know. All right, so moving on. So I'm going to ask something. Let's see what it is.
What's interesting about paranoid delusion, at least as I understand it, is, and you said this earlier, there's always a kernel of truth. It's like you're sat in the coffee shop and somebody probably does look at you, right? That definitely happens. But like that person's intent, probably no intent there. You go online, ironically, to some extent, like people are watching you constantly because it's like how people make money on the internet. It's like by tracking, people and building a profile. So there's truth in that. I don't think it's quite the kind of very personalized tracking that you're talking about. So in these scenarios, there's truth, some truth at the heart of that delusion. It's not arbitrary.
Right, and what makes it so fascinating to me is the overlay of...
That is a well-recognized psychiatric fact. I'm certainly talking to my psychiatrist about it. That there's something that's real in a delusion. It's just like it blows up from there. All right, so let's keep going, and I think I'm going to start coming to a place where I'm going to wrap up for today because I've got a few things to do. So let's maybe get to whatever this big blob of me talking here is. And then we can pick that up later.
Right, and what makes it so fascinating to me is the overlay of every person's psychological dynamic anyway. So I would say, without, giving my whole history, I would say that my basic tendency is this sort of Adlerian theory of I'm either good or bad, which I think kids get very early on. So someone thinks I'm good, someone thinks I'm bad, I'm being assessed. I got a lot of that from my family, trying to kind of be the right kid, be a good kid, and then as an adult, am I succeeding as an adult? What do people think of me? Can I, of course, quiet that voice and just be concerned about what I think of myself, what my relationships are like in terms of healthy? That's normal. That's just being a human. But then you take the same basic framework, and I go around my bad and amplify that to I'm either a straight up enemy to someone, or I'm some kind of hero. All of which are delusional. And
So what you're telling me is you're not the enemy of the giant war machine.
No, I'm definitely a hero. I'm just some sort of warrior for peace. It's like completely unique to the rest of people who want peace in this world.
I'm kind of confused about my comment there. It's almost like I was commenting based on something we talked about before. It doesn't make sense in context.
All of which are delusional. And
So what you're telling me is you're not the enemy of the giant war machine.
No, I'm definitely a hero. I'm just some sort of warrior for peace. It's like completely unique to the rest of people who want peace in this world.
We're laughing about.
All right, so I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut that down, taking out. Is that going to talk about the war machine? I don't really understand what we're talking about. So if I don't understand, I'm going to assume nobody understands.
Which are delusional, and yeah.
The only thing I'm going to do is kind of take that little trailing and that goes nowhere.
All of which are delusional.
There we go. Awesome. So put myself a note, pick up here, and I think that was an hour or so of editing. I feel good about where I've got to. I don't know. Do I feel good? I've got 12 minutes done, and that's all. Everything I've got still to do, and I've only gone from about an hour and 5 to an hour and 3 minutes. So that's okay. It'll take me a little while. Sometimes talking about it while I'm doing it, I guess, takes a little longer, but in a strange way makes it easier. So there you go. Anyway, thank you for being kind enough to drop in. It's been nice to talk to somebody while I edit, even if it's only people who can't talk back. And I will be doing this again in the near future in my quest to get this episode edited and out. So I'm way behind. All right. Thanks then. Bye.